The massive black ship moved through space like a predator hunting for prey. Its hull was covered in spikes and razor-sharp edges that could cut through steel. The ship belonged to the Deathworld Alliance, the most feared group in the galaxy. Inside, the ship Admiral Kethavar sat on his throne made from the bones of ancient beasts. His 6 arms were crossed and his red eyes glowed in the darkness. Around him stood the leaders of other Deathworlds. General Zixtal from the Vorthan clans had scars covering his entire body from fighting monsters since childhood. Commander Yexmore from the Acid Plains had skin that could resist poison that would kill normal beings in seconds. The Alliance had ruled the dangerous parts of space for 300 years. They came from planets where everything tried to kill you. On Mortania, it rained acid every day and the ground was made of sharp crystals. On Vorth, the trees had teeth and the animals hunted in packs bigger than armies. On Nexus Prime, the air itself was poison and only the strongest could breathe without dying. These beings were proud of being the toughest creatures alive. They had survived things that would make other species run away screaming. Their planets had made them strong. Their worlds had tried to kill them every day since birth, but they had fought back and won. Now they were looking for new members. Someone had told them about a planet called Earth. The reports made it sound perfect for their alliance. The planet had survived ice ages that covered everything in ice for thousands of years. Giant rocks from space had hit it and almost destroyed all life. Massive storms called hurricanes could destroy entire cities. The ground shook and split open in earthquakes. Buildings fell down and people died. But somehow life kept going. There were creatures on Earth that could kill you in hundreds of ways. Bears that could crush bones with their paws. Sharks with teeth like knives that lived in the water. Tiny insects that carried diseases, small spiders whose bite could kill you in minutes. Snakes with poison that stopped your heart. The report said these Terrans had somehow learned to live with all of this. Admiral Kethavar was excited. These humans sounded like they might be worthy of joining the Alliance. Finally, they might find beings who understood what it meant to fight for survival every single day. He ordered his ship to go to Earth to meet these Deathworld warriors. The journey took many days. When they reached Earth, the Alliance ship stayed hidden behind the moon. They sent a smaller ship down to the planet's surface to make first contact. The diplomatic team expected to meet scarred warriors or perhaps tribal leaders who had proven themselves in battle. Instead, they met Ambassador Hannah Park. She was a small human female with smooth skin and bright eyes that seemed to shine with happiness. When she saw the Alliance delegates, she smiled widely and clapped her hands together like she had just received a wonderful gift. This confused the delegates who had never seen anyone look happy during first contact meetings. Hannah walked right up to them without any fear. The Alliance delegates were twice her size and covered in natural armor and weapons, but she acted like they were old friends coming to visit. She spoke in a cheerful voice that made them feel strange. "Welcome to Earth," she said. "I am so excited to meet beings from other worlds. This is like a dream come true. We have wondered for so long if we were alone in the universe." The delegates looked at each other with confusion. Where were the guards? Where were the weapons? Where was the fear that always came when they visited new worlds? General Zixtal tried to look more threatening. He made his spikes stand up and showed his sharp teeth. But Hannah just looked interested. She asked if his spikes were for protection or for attack, and whether they grew naturally, or if he had to sharpen them. She seemed to think his fearsome appearance was fascinating rather than scary. "Please come inside," she said. "I have prepared refreshments for our meeting." She led them into a building that had windows made of clear glass. The Alliance delegates were amazed glass was so fragile. How did these beings protect themselves with walls you could see through and break easily? But Hannah seemed to think this was normal. Inside the building, she offered them something called coffee and small round things called cookies. The coffee smelled strong and bitter. The Alliance delegates thought this might be some kind of test. Maybe the coffee was poisonous or the cookies were made from the bones of enemies. Admiral Kethavar took a small sip of the coffee, expecting it to burn his throat or make him sick. Instead, it just tasted hot and bitter. Hannah explained that coffee came from plants that grew on Earth and that humans drank it every morning to wake up. This seemed like a very mild stimulant compared to the battle drugs his people used. The cookies were sweet and soft. Hana said she had made them herself in her kitchen at home. She talked about cooking like it was a normal thing that everyone did. The Alliance delegates had never heard of beings making their own food for pleasure. Food was for survival, not for enjoyment. During the meeting, Hana asked many questions about their worlds and their alliance. She listened carefully when they described the dangers of their planets. She nodded and made interested sounds, but she did not look afraid or impressed. She acted like they were describing normal things that happened everywhere. When Admiral Kethvar described the lava flows on his homeworld that could melt metal, Hana said that Earth had similar things called volcanoes. She mentioned that some humans actually climbed into volcanoes to study them and that others lived in cities built near active volcanoes. This made no sense to the Admiral. Why would anyone choose to live near something so dangerous? General Zixtal told her about the Predator, forests on his world where every shadow could hide death. Hana nodded and said that Earth had forests too. She talked about humans who went camping in forests for fun, sleeping outside in small fabric shelters while wild animals walked around nearby. She called this relaxing. The Alliance delegates began to feel confused. These humans seemed too soft and happy to be Deathworld survivors. But their planet was clearly dangerous according to all the reports. How had such cheerful beings survived? On a world full of deadly creatures and natural disasters, Hana accepted their invitation to send human representatives to the Alliance ship. She seemed excited about the chance to learn more about other species and to share information about Earth. She said she would select their best people to represent humanity. As the Alliance delegates returned to their ship, they felt unsure about what they had found. These humans did not look like warriors. They did not act like survivors of a death world. They seemed more like children playing games than hardened fighters, but their planet was definitely dangerous, so they must be tougher than they appeared. Admiral Kethvar decided to proceed with the formal invitation. He would bring these humans to the Dominion's edge and put them through the traditional trials. Then he would see what these Terrans were really made of. The trials had broken many species before. If the humans were truly Deathworld survivors, they would prove it in combat. Within days, a human ship approached the Dominion's edge. It was small and white, and looked nothing like a warship. Captain Dongmin Lee led the human delegation along with engineer Subin Kim, medic Jinwoo Park, and cultural specialist Young-hee Choyas. Their ship docked with the massive Alliance vessel. The Deathworld Alliance prepared their most challenging tests. They had no idea that their reputation as the galaxy's toughest survivors was about to be completely destroyed by a species that considered survival an everyday activity. The combat arena on the Dominion's edge was the most terrifying place in the known galaxy. The walls were made of black metal covered in spikes. Sharp blades moved back and forth across the floor. Automated weapons tracked any movement ready to fire. Energy barriers crackled with deadly electricity. The air itself smelled like death and fear. Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation platform looking down at the arena with satisfaction. This was where the Alliance separated the strong from the weak. Every species that wanted to join had to prove themselves here. Many had died trying. The floor was stained with the blood of dozens of failed candidates. The human delegation stood at the arena entrance looking around with curiosity. Captain Dongmin Lee was a medium-sized man with calm eyes and steady hands. Engineer Subin Kim carried a small toolkit and kept examining the mechanical systems around them. Medic Jinwoo Park had a gentle face but strong shoulders. Cultural specialist Young-hee Choi was taking notes in a small book. General Zixtal activated the arena systems. The weapons powered up with threatening sounds. The blade traps started moving. The energy barriers began crackling louder. The Alliance members gathered to watch what they expected to be an entertaining display of human weakness. The first trial was called the Pain Threshold Test. New candidates had to stand still while electrical current ran through their bodies. The current started weak but got stronger every few seconds. Most species began screaming within the first minute. Some collapsed. Some begged for mercy. The Mortanians considered pain tolerance the most important warrior quality. Captain Lee stepped forward first. He placed his hands on the metal contacts and waited. The current began flowing through his body. His muscles tensed slightly, but his face remained calm. After 30 seconds, the current doubled in strength. Lee grimaced, but did not make a sound. At 1 minute, the current was strong enough to knock most beings unconscious. Lee was still standing. His jaw was clenched and sweat appeared on his forehead, but he had not moved from his position. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward with interest. This was better than expected. At 2 minutes, the current reached levels that had killed weaker species. Lee finally spoke, but not to beg for mercy. Instead, he looked up at the control booth and asked if they could increase the power a bit more. He said it felt like the electrics fence on his grandfather's farm back on Earth. The fence was used to keep cattle from wandering away. The Alliance delegates stared at each other in confusion. What kind of farming required electric barriers strong enough to hurt Deathworld survivors? And why did this human think the pain was too weak? General Zixtal turned the power up to maximum levels that had never been used on living beings before. Lee's body shook from the electricity, but he remained standing. After another minute, he asked if this was the full extent of the test, because he had work to do later. The test operator was so shocked he forgot to turn off the power engineer. Kim went next for the second trial. This was the toxic environment challenge. Candidates had to walk through a maze filled with poisonous gas that burned the lungs and throat of most species. The gas was so dangerous that even the Alliance members wore protective gear. When they had to enter the area, Kim looked at the green gas swirling inside the maze. She opened her small toolkit and pulled out a basic breathing mask that looked like it was made for construction work, not for surviving deadly poison. She put it on and walked into the maze like she was going for a casual stroll inside. The maze, Kim stopped several times to examine the gas dispensers. She seemed more interested in how they worked than in the danger they posed. She called out suggestions for improving the gas distribution system. Her voice was clear and unafraid. The maze that had killed dozens of candidates was apparently just an engineering problem to solve. When she emerged from the maze, Kim was completely unharmed. She told the Alliance technicians that the gas smelled similar to the sulfur springs near her hometown where she used to go hiking with her family. She had brought the breathing mask because she thought the air might be a little stale on the spaceship. The third trial was supposed to be the most brutal of all. The combat challenge paired new candidates against proven Alliance warriors in single combat. Most species sent their strongest fighters for this test, knowing they would probably die but hoping to show courage before the medic Jinwoo Park volunteered for the combat trial. This confused everyone. A medic was supposed to heal people, not fight them. But Jinwoo stepped into the combat circle with the same calm expression he had worn since arriving. His opponent was Drakmor, the Vorthon berserker. Drakmor stood 9 feet, tall and weighed as much as a small vehicle. His natural armor plating could stop bullets. His claws could tear through steel. His roar could paralyze enemies with fear. He had killed over 50 beings in ritual combat and had never been defeated. Combat began with Drakmor charging forward with his massive war axe raised above his head, ready to split the small human in half. But Jinwoo did something no one expected. Instead of fighting back or running away, he stood still and watched Drakmor's movement carefully. When Drakmor swung his axe, Jinwoo stepped to the side, easily avoiding the blow. Then he did something that stopped the entire arena. Jinwoo began talking to Drakmor in a concerned voice. He pointed out that the berserker's stance was putting too much strain on his lower back. Jinwoo explained that swinging such a heavy weapon with poor posture would cause long-term joint damage. He demonstrated proper lifting techniques and suggested stretching exercises that would prevent muscle injury. The medic was giving a Vorthon berserker advice about workplace safety in the middle of a death match. Drakmor was so confused he stopped attacking. He had never had anyone worry about his health during combat. Jinwoo continued his impromptu medical consultation, pointing out signs of inflammation in Drakmor's shoulder joints and recommending better weapon grips to reduce repetitive stress injuries. The berserker became genuinely interested in what Jinwoo was saying. He had been having back pain for months but had ignored it because warriors were supposed to endure pain. Now this human was offering practical solutions. Jinwoo suggested some simple exercises and showed Drakmor how to adjust his armor for better weight distribution. Admiral Kethvar watched in horror as his most fearsome warrior sat down in the combat arena to try the stretching routine that the human medic was demonstrating. The deathmatch had turned into a physical therapy session. The crowd of Alliance observers sat in stunned silence. Cultural specialist Young Hee Choi was documenting everything in her notebook. She seemed fascinated by the cultural significance of the trials. She asked detailed questions about the history and meaning of each challenge. Her academic interest made the deadly trials seem like interesting social customs rather than tests of survival. When all the trials were finished, the humans stood together looking slightly disappointed. Captain Lee mentioned that he had expected the test to be more challenging based on the Alliance's fearsome reputation. Engineer Kim was already sketching improvements for the arena's safety systems. Medic Jin Woo was still talking with Drakmore about proper nutrition. For large warriors, the Alliance leadership gathered in an emergency meeting. They had designed these trials to break the spirits of Deathworld survivors. Instead, the humans had treated the trials like minor inconveniences and workplace hazards. The most terrifying tests in the galaxy had become casual problems to solve. Admiral Kethvar felt a cold fear growing in his chest. If these humans found the Alliance trials too easy, what did that say about the Alliance itself? Were they not as tough as they thought they were? Had they just invited beings who were more dangerous than they could imagine? The humans were smiling and talking about how interesting everything had been. They seemed to think the trials were entertaining cultural demonstrations rather than life or death challenges. They had no idea they had just made the galaxy's most feared warriors question everything they believed about strength and survival. The Great Hall of the Dominion's Edge had been decorated for the most sacred ceremony in Alliance culture. The Feast of Conquered Worlds was held only when new species joined their brotherhood. The massive chamber was filled with trophies from 1,000 battles. Skulls of defeated enemies hung from the ceiling. Weapons from destroyed civilizations lined the walls. The air was thick with smoke from burning incense made from the bones of ancient predators. Admiral Kethvar sat at the head of the enormous table carved from a single piece of volcanic rock. His ceremonial armor was polished to a deadly shine. General Zixtal wore his battle scars proudly displaying the marks left by creatures that had tried to kill him. Commander Yexmore's skin glowed with the chemical burns that proved his survival on the acid plains. The feast was designed to separate true Deathworld survivors from pretenders. The food and drink were carefully chosen to test the limits of alien biology. Each dish contained toxins that would kill weaker species. The beverages could dissolve the internal organs of civilized beings. The Alliance members had spent generations building immunity to these deadly substances. Cultural specialist Young Hee Choi entered the hall with her ever-present notebook. She looked around with the same fascination she had shown during the trials. She began sketching the decorations and writing detailed descriptions of the ceremonial arrangements her academic interest made. The terrifying chamber seemed like an interesting museum display. The first course was served on plates made from the shells of armored beasts. Each portion contained meat from creatures so dangerous that hunting them was considered a death sentence. The flesh was still moving slightly as digestive acids continued breaking down the muscle tissue. Most species would die from just touching this meat. Young Hee examined her plate with scientific curiosity. She asked detailed questions about the preparation methods and the cultural significance of eating such dangerous food. She took careful notes about how the Alliance preserved meat from creatures that were toxic, even after death. When she took her first bite, Young Hee chewed thoughtfully and nodded with approval. She mentioned that the flavor reminded her of a traditional Korean dish called sanakji, which was made from live octopus. The tentacles moved in your mouth while you ate them. She said her grandmother had taught her to eat it when she was very young. The Alliance members stared at her in disbelief. This human child had been eating moving food since childhood. What kind of Deathworld trained its young to consume living prey? The second course was even more dangerous. Plants from the shadow gardens of Nexus Prime that released poison when chewed. The leaves could paralyze most beings within seconds. The roots contained acids that burned through normal digestive systems. Only the strongest Alliance members could eat these plants without dying young. He took notes about the plants before eating them. She asked about their growing conditions and whether they were cultivated or gathered wild. When she ate the poisonous leaves, she commented that they had an interesting bitter flavor that was similar to some traditional Korean vegetables that were fermented in the ground for months. She mentioned that Earth humans regularly ate foods that other species might consider dangerous raw fish that could contain parasites, fermented vegetables that were intentionally allowed to rot, aged cheeses that were covered in toxic mold, spicy peppers that caused physical pain. Young-hee described these as normal parts of human cuisine. The main course was the centerpiece of the feast, flesh from the thunder lizards of Mauritania. These creatures were so deadly that killing one was considered the ultimate test of warrior skill. The meat contained electrical charges that would stop most hearts. The Alliance members had to eat it quickly before the energy built up to lethal levels. Young-hee ate her portion slowly, taking time to appreciate the unique properties of the meat. She said the electrical tingling sensation was fascinating and asked if the creatures used bioelectricity for hunting. She wanted to know if human scientists could study these animals to learn more about natural electrical generation. While eating, she told stories about electric eels from Earth that could generate powerful shocks to stun prey. She mentioned that some humans kept these dangerous fish as pets in glass tanks in their homes. The Alliance members could not understand why anyone would voluntarily live with creatures that could electrocute them. The drinking portion of the ceremony began with Mauritanian blood wine. This beverage was so potent that it was classified as a controlled weapon on most civilized worlds. The alcohol content was high enough to dissolve metal. The additives included venom from a dozen different predators. One sip could blind weaker species. Young-hee accepted her cup and took a careful sip. She made notes about the complex flavor profile and asked about the fermentation process. She mentioned that the iron content was noticeable and wondered if it came from actual blood or from mineral deposits in the soil. After a few more sips, she commented that while the wine was quite strong, it was not as potent as some traditional Korean spirits that her grandfather made in buried ceramic pots. The old man would leave rice wine fermenting underground for years until it became strong enough to use as medicine or to clean wounds. General Zixtal could not believe what he was hearing. This tiny human was comparing their most deadly ceremonial drink to homemade alcohol that old humans made as a hobby. How strong were these earth spirits if they made Mauritanian blood wine seem mild? The storytelling competition began as the final part of the feast. Each species was expected to share their most terrifying survival stories to prove their worthiness. The tales were meant to inspire fear and respect among the listeners. Admiral Kethvar told the legendary story of his battle against the plasma worms of Zerion Prime. These creatures lived in pools of molten metal and could spit fire hot enough to melt starship hulls. He had fought them alone for 3 days without food or water while his ship burned around him. The story usually left audiences trembling with awe. He listened, politely, and took notes about the cultural importance of individual combat stories. She asked thoughtful questions about the symbolism and meaning of fighting alone against impossible odds. When it was time for humans to share a story, she looked through her notes thoughtfully. She decided to tell what she thought was a comparable tale about Captain Lee's military training exercise. His unit had gotten lost during winter maneuvers in the mountains. They had to survive for a week with minimal supplies while search and rescue teams tried to find them. Young-hee described the conditions as routine military training. Sub-zero temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Altitude so high that the air was too thin to breathe easily. Snowstorms that could bury a person in seconds. Wild animals that saw humans as potential food. She explained how the soldiers built shelters from snow and tree branches, found clean water by melting ice over small fires, navigated using stars when their equipment failed, avoided hypothermia by sharing body heat, rationed their emergency food to last longer than planned. The human soldiers had treated this as normal training rather than a life-or-death struggle. Young-hee mentioned that similar exercises happened regularly, and that soldiers often volunteered for these challenging assignments. She said Captain Lee considered it good preparation for real combat situations. The Alliance members sat in shocked silence. The human military deliberately put their people through conditions that would kill most Alliance warriors. They did this as practice, not as punishment. The soldiers volunteered for these deadly exercises and considered them routine training. Admiral Kethvar felt his confidence cracking. These humans spoke about surviving impossible conditions like it was everyday business. Their stories of casual survival made the Alliance's greatest legends seem like minor inconveniences. What kind of Deathworld produced beings who considered their most terrifying trials to be normal training exercises? The sacred chamber of dominance was the most holy place on the Dominion's edge. The walls were covered with holographic displays, showing the conquest of Deathworlds. Ancient weapons from defeated enemies hung in places of honor. The air hummed with the power of advanced technology that had been taken from 1,000 defeated civilizations. This was where the Alliance held their most important ceremony, the demonstration of planetary dominance. Each member species had to prove they had truly conquered their hostile homeworld, not just survived but actually dominated the forces that tried to kill them daily. This ceremony separated the Alliance from all other beings in the galaxy. Admiral Kethvar activated the massive display screens. The first presentation showed the glory of Mortania. His people had built cities inside active volcanoes. The holographic images showed Mortanians walking through rivers of lava, wearing only basic protective clothing. Children played games. On platforms suspended over molten rock, families lived in homes carved directly into volcanic walls. The volcanic eruptions that destroyed other worlds were just background noise on Mortania. The Mortanians had learned to predict eruptions and use the energy for their technology. They had turned their planet's most deadly feature into a source of power and pride. Admiral Kethvar spoke with satisfaction about how his people had made volcanoes serve them instead of fear them. General Ziekstal took control of the displays next. The images showed the nightmare forests of Vorth where every tree had teeth and every shadow could hide death. His people had not just survived these forests, they had tamed them. Vorthan children learned to hunt the forest predators before they could walk properly. The holographic display showed Vorthans riding creatures that looked like giant wolves with too many teeth. They used the carnivorous plants as weapons in their wars. They had built cities in the treetops connected by bridges made from the bones of defeated monsters. General Ziekstal proudly explained how his people had become the apex predators on a world full of apex predators. Commander Yexmore showed images of the acid plains where his people lived. The ground was covered in chemicals that could dissolve metal in seconds. The air was so toxic that most beings would die from breathing it. The rain was pure acid that could strip flesh from bones. Yet the Nexarians had built a thriving civilization there. The holographic presentation showed Nexarian cities with buildings that grew stronger when acid rain fell on them. Their people had evolved skin that could resist any poison. Their children swam in acid pools for recreation. They had turned their planet's deadliest features into sources of strength and beauty. When it was time for the human presentation, Medic Jin Woo Park stepped forward with enthusiasm. He had prepared what he thought was an impressive display of human mastery over their environment. He activated his portable display device and began showing images of Earth civilization. The first images showed Antarctic research stations, where humans lived and worked in temperatures that regularly dropped to -40 degrees. Jin Woo explained that scientists stayed there for months at a time, studying ice and weather patterns. He mentioned that some researchers brought their families to live at these stations during the research seasons. The Alliance members nodded with approval until Jin Woo casually mentioned that working in Antarctica was considered a prestigious assignment that humans competed for. He said the researchers considered the isolation and extreme cold to be minor inconveniences compared to the scientific opportunities. The next images showed human cities built in deserts where the temperature could reach over 50 degrees during the day and drop below freezing at night. Jin Woo explained that millions of humans lived in these areas by choice. They had built air conditioning systems and water distribution networks to make the desert comfortable. He showed underwater research facilities where humans lived beneath the ocean for weeks at a time studying marine life. The pressure at those depths could crush normal structures, but humans had developed technology to make it safe. He mentioned that some humans considered underwater living so relaxing that they built underwater hotels for vacations. Engineer Subin Kim took over the presentation to show technical details about human infrastructure. She displayed images of cities built directly on earthquake fault lines, where the ground could split open without warning. Humans had developed building techniques that let their structures flex and bend without breaking. She showed cities built in areas where hurricanes struck regularly, bringing winds that could destroy buildings and floods that could wash away entire neighborhoods. The humans had simply developed warning systems and evacuation procedures. They rebuilt their cities in the same dangerous locations after every disaster. The presentation continued with images of human settlements built on the slopes of active volcanoes. Subin explained that humans found volcanic soil very fertile for growing food. They considered the risk of eruption to be an acceptable trade-off for better farming. The volcanic areas were actually more densely populated than safer regions. Captain Dongmin Lee concluded the presentation by showing what he called human recreational activities. The images showed people voluntarily jumping out of aircraft with only fabric parachutes to slow their fall. He explained that this was called skydiving, and millions of humans paid money to do it for fun. The next images showed humans swimming with sharks in the ocean. Captain Lee mentioned that shark diving was a popular tourist activity. People traveled to dangerous waters specifically to get close to predators. That could kill them in one bite. He said the sharks were usually more afraid of the humans than the humans were of the sharks. The presentation showed humans climbing vertical rock faces using only ropes and metal spikes. They called this rock climbing and considered it a relaxing hobby. Some humans climbed mountains so tall that the air was too thin to breathe without oxygen tanks. They did this during their vacation time to relax from their normal jobs. Captain Lee showed images of something called extreme sports, where humans deliberately put themselves in dangerous situations for entertainment. People rode down mountains on small boards at high speeds. They jumped off bridges attached to elastic ropes. They raced vehicles through dangerous terrain at speeds that could kill them instantly. He explained that these activities were so popular that entire industries had developed around them. Humans spent billions of their currency every year on equipment and travel expenses just to risk their lives in controlled, dangerous situations. He mentioned that safety regulations had to be created because humans kept inventing new ways to put themselves in danger. The silence in the sacred chamber was absolute. Admiral Kethvar's translator unit made strange noises as it tried to process the concept of voluntary danger-seeking behavior. General Zixtal had stopped breathing normally. Commander Yexmore was staring at the display screens like they showed impossible things. Cultural specialist Young Hee-choi noticed the strange reaction from the alliance leaders. She asked politely if there was something wrong with the presentation. She wondered if the translation systems were having trouble with some of the human concepts. Admiral Kethvar finally managed to speak. He asked in a voice that shook slightly whether humans actually chose to live in dangerous places and participate in deadly activities for pleasure rather than survival. Young Hee confirmed that yes, most of these things were done voluntarily because humans found danger exciting rather than terrifying. The alliance leaders looked at each other with growing horror. They had built their entire civilization around surviving the deadly challenges of their home worlds, but these humans had taken survival and turned it into entertainment. They faced danger not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The Deathworld Alliance was not a gathering of the galaxy's toughest survivors. They were apparently just a support group for species who were not quite capable enough to turn their survival challenges into recreational activities. The final meeting took place in Admiral Kethvar's private chamber. The room was smaller than the great halls, but somehow more intimidating. Ancient weapons covered every wall. Trophies from his personal battles filled display cases. The lighting was dim and red, casting shadows that made everything look threatening. Admiral Kethvar sat behind his desk, made from the skull of a creature so large it could have eaten starships. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed the reports from the human. Visit General Zixtal stood nearby, looking like he had seen something that broke his understanding of reality. Commander Yexmore stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Cultural specialist Young Hee-choi had asked to speak with the Alliance leadership before the humans departed. She wanted to discuss future cooperation between their species. She had brought her notebook full of observations and suggestions for cultural exchange programs. Young Hee sat across from the Alliance leaders, with the same cheerful expression she had worn since arriving. She seemed completely unaware of the crisis she and her companions had caused. She opened her notebook and began reading from her carefully organized notes. She had been studying the Alliance's territorial claims and colonization patterns. She found their expansion strategy very interesting from an anthropological perspective, but she had noticed some gaps in their territorial control that seemed unusual for such a powerful alliance. There were several star systems with valuable resources and strategic importance that the Alliance had completely avoided. Young He wondered if there were political reasons for avoiding these areas, perhaps treaties with other species, or religious restrictions that prevented colonization. Admiral Kethvar felt his throat tighten as he realized what Young He was asking about. Those star systems contained Class X death worlds, planets so impossibly hostile that even the Alliance, with all their death world experience, had declared them uninhabitable. These worlds represented the absolute limit of what their species could survive. General Zixtal tried to explain without losing face. He said those systems contained worlds with extreme conditions that exceeded even their considerable survival capabilities. The planets had combinations of deadly features that would overwhelm their specialized adaptations. One planet had gravity so intense it would crush their enhanced bone structures. Another had atmospheric composition that would dissolve their specialized respiratory systems. A third had radiation levels that would overwhelm even their evolved resistance to toxic environments. Young He pulled out her portable data unit and cross-referenced the coordinates with Earth's stellar cartography databases. Her face brightened with recognition as she identified several of the systems. She made excited sounds and began talking rapidly about human exploration plans. She explained that humans had already established preliminary research outposts on 3 of those worlds. The conditions were challenging, but nothing that human engineering could not handle. She mentioned that full colonization missions were scheduled. Within the next decade, engineer Subin Kim had reviewed the technical data about these worlds during the trip to Alliance space. She had been working on equipment designs for the colonization efforts. The high-gravity worlds would require stronger building materials, but humans had already developed the necessary technology. The atmospheric problems could be solved with improved air filtration systems and protective equipment. The radiation issues were similar to challenges humans faced in space travel. They had already developed shielding technology that would make long-term habitation possible. Captain Dongmin Lee joined the conversation to discuss the military applications of these extreme worlds. He mentioned that the high-gravity planets would be perfect for training facilities. Human soldiers could become much stronger by exercising in increased gravity environments. The extreme conditions would also make excellent testing grounds for new equipment and survival techniques. Captain Lee spoke about these deadly worlds like they were valuable real estate rather than uninhabitable nightmares. Medic Jinwoo Park was most excited about the biological opportunities. The extreme environments had produced unique life forms that could revolutionize human medicine. The radiation-resistant organisms could help develop better cancer treatments. The high-pressure adapted species could improve understanding of human physiology. Young He described the cultural opportunities that isolated frontier colonies would provide. Humans could study how their society adapted to extreme conditions. New art forms and literature might develop from the unique experiences of living on Class X death worlds. The humans began discussing colonization plans like they were talking about home renovation projects. They debated which worlds would be best for different types of settlements. They argued about resource allocation and construction schedules. They planned recreational facilities and entertainment complexes, as the humans chatted excitedly about turning the galaxy's most feared death worlds into suburban neighborhoods and vacation destinations. Admiral Kethvar felt something break inside his mind. The Deathworld Alliance had spent centuries building their reputation as the toughest survivors in the galaxy, but they had just encountered a species that treated their ultimate challenges as weekend hobbies. Earth was not just another death world. It was apparently a death world that had somehow produced a species so absurdly over-adapted to survival that they had forgotten danger was supposed to be dangerous. The Alliance had built their entire identity around being stronger and tougher than everyone else. They were the beings who could survive where others would die. They were the warriors who laughed at death itself, but these humans made them look like children. Playing dress-up, Young Hee finished her presentation by suggesting joint colonization projects. The humans would be happy to share their technology and expertise with the Alliance. They could work together to establish settlements on worlds that neither species could handle alone. The Alliance leaders sat in horrified silence as they realized the true scope of their humiliation. These humans were offering to help them colonize worlds that the Alliance had declared impossible to survive. The offer was made with genuine kindness, but it felt like the worst insult imaginable. Admiral HFY made a decision that would change Alliance policy forever. He politely declined the human offer of cooperation. He explained that the Alliance preferred to work independently. He thanked the humans for their visit and wished them well in their future endeavors. The humans accepted this gracefully. They exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. They invited the Alliance to visit Earth anytime they wanted to see more human culture. They left with positive reports about their new neighbors and began planning cultural exchange programs. After the human ship departed the Alliance, leadership held an emergency session. They quietly withdrew their invitation for humanity to join their organization. They could not risk their reputation by associating with beings who might accidentally reveal that their fearsome alliance was actually just a support group for species who were not quite tough enough to handle the really difficult planets. Admiral HFY spent the following months developing new Alliance recruitment standards. The application process now included detailed psychological evaluations to identify potential extreme adaptability disorders. All candidates had to provide mandatory disclosure of any recreational activities that involved voluntary risk-taking behavior. The Alliance had learned the most terrifying lesson in their history. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was not knowing just how outclassed you really were. They would never again assume that surviving a death world made them the toughest beings in the universe. The humans returned to Earth completely unaware of the cosmic embarrassment they had caused. They filed reports about friendly aliens who seemed a little shy but had interesting cultural traditions. The human government began preparing diplomatic gifts and planning return visits to strengthen their new friendship with the Deathworld Alliance.